With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
This is Wheel Bearings. I'm Dan Roth from Forbes.
I'm Sam Abu-Al-Samad from Guidehouse Insights.
I'm Rebecca Linland from Rebecca Drives. We're mixing it up on you.
Yeah. And yay, we're all here for the first time in like a month and a half. Yeah. So thanks, everybody, for joining us. And Rebecca, since I think this marks your triumphant return, let's talk about what
Clearly she survived
driving.
the babysitting episode.
That's right. That's right. I hope you don't mind that we called you Auntie Rebecca.
No, that was adorable. No, so my nephews are the cutest little guys. They're 8 and 4, and they're just delicious. And I actually have my 4-year-old nephew on tape. So my brother and his girlfriend live in this really cool place, and there was an Audi R8 parked outside, and I heard it when it revved up, and I said to my nephew, let's go look at it. So we looked outside, and we could look at the parking lot, and I was like, look, watch it drive away. And he goes, that looks like a cheetah. And so I have him on. So I said, come over here, Zach, you have to say that. So I taped him saying it, and he's just the cutest little thing. So no, we had a very good time. And I won't get too off track, but what's so interesting to me, so my nephew, Parker, is 8, and we have very long discussions about football because we both love football. It's a shame because they're raising him as a Giants fan, which is all sorts of wrong. And it's
it could
actually
be worse, right? It could be a Patriots fan.
No.
There's that rivalry. There's a lot of people in New England who love the Giants, do not like the Patriots. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to sidetrack you.
But what's interesting when I talk to him about football is that he doesn't have this unconscious bias that women shouldn't know about sports. It's really interesting. Like, he just talks to me
nice?
and it's great. And it's just so funny to I'm always aware of it because I keep waiting for him to say something like, oh, isn't that, you're a girl, you're not supposed to know about sports. But it's marked, like how kids his age just don't have that unconscious bias.
Like,
it's really
just
cool.
People, and that was one of the biggest turnoffs was the sports dudes. So good.
Turnouts for you?
For me, yeah. It was it was a huge turnoff. And then now my 12-year-old loves football. He's playing football, and so he knows more than I know already. And so he's doing the touch football league this year,
that's awesome.
and he's learning like everything. He's like, Dad, we're gonna run some patterns. I'm like, you're making it so complicated, man. Just tell me where to
Auntie
throw.
Rebecca will come up.
Yeah,
I'll help him out.
That's right. You guys you'll understand each other. You'll be like, blue 42. You're like, you'll know everything. I'm like, I don't know.
Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to get us off track.
Got us off track. But you're back, and you have driven the 2020 Hyundai Kona EV and the 2020 Honda Civic Type-R. So it's kind of a good dichotomy. Which did you like better?
It is. It's always hard to say which you like better, right? Because they're so different. I mean, they both do things really, really well. So the Hyundai Kona Electric, which is not available in every state. That's the first thing that we should make note of. So this is available in a handful. It's basically California, Colorado, Connecticut, Maine, Maryland, Mass, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, of course.
It's all the states that follow the California zero emission vehicle mandate.
It is.
So it's like 12 states.
They're primarily on the coast. So you don't see them very often. But what's interesting is that they look actually exactly like a Hyundai Kona. So I saw 2 Hyundai Konas on the road driving home this afternoon, and the EV looks exactly the same, which I really like. I think I've talked about this before, where I wish the Audi e-tron was just the Q6 because I don't want it to be weird. I want it to just be an alternative powertrain. You can get a 4-cylinder, you can get a 6-cylinder, and you can get an EV. It should all just kind of be the same. So I love that strategy by Hyundai, that it's nothing weird about it. The instant torque is a blast. and I have to be really careful because on our post road where I've gotten pulled over before, it is very easy to go from 0 to 60 in a split second.
Yeah, I've one of the others who has experienced getting pulled over on Boston Post Road at some time in the past.
Yes.
So yeah,
it's very easy to do that. So, and ironically, the last time I had a Honda Civic, it wasn't a Type-R, but the last time I got a Honda Civic was the last time I got pulled over on Boston.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think I remember you telling us that you got pulled over in it.
It was like almost a year ago, I think now. So the Hyundai Kona, a couple things that I love about it. First of all, it's 258 miles of range, which is fantastic. It's actually, I feel like I charged it even a little bit more than that. But it's basically a tank full of gas. I mean, you can go all week in it. I only have a trickle charge, which I know somebody legitimately said, you should get a level 2 charger in your home. And I agree. But I charged it overnight. I charged it for about 16 hours, I think it was. And it actually got almost 90 miles, which, 16 hours seems like a really long time. But when you think, I got home at 7 tonight, it's 12 hours. If you leave at 7 in the morning, nobody's leaving at 7 in the morning to go anyplace anymore. So even if you leave at 9, you're still getting 14 hours of charge. So on that 110, plugging it right into the wall, it's not terrible. And that's a good amount of miles to get on on a trickle charge like that. So
yeah, well, so where you are too, like that could get you into Manhattan and out, no problem.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And there are some high-speed chargers around. I'm hoping I get a chance tomorrow to go and check one out and see what it's like to just charge, properly. One thing I wanted to ask, and this is just a general question too, is whether I can use a Tesla charger.
No.
Okay.
Tesla has their own unique proprietary.
They have their own unique
connector.
one, right? Yeah, that's what I thought.
So you can't use the supercharger.
Okay, I'm going to go to there's a couple of rest stops on 95 that I know have Tesla chargers that were installed a couple of years ago. So I'm going to go and see if they have any other chargers there, like Electrify America or something like that.
There are apps that what is it? Is it ChargePoint?
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
And the Kona, when you put in, if you're going someplace, first of all, it of course will tell you if you don't have enough range to get there, and then
it'll locate chargers.
And it'll locate chargers for you.
Most
That's
EVs
awesome.
do that now. Within the nav system, they have charger information embedded in there, so you can see. You can actually have it plot out your route if you need to charge along the way, to put in a detour to a charger. So you can do that. And the other thing you can also do is you can look in Google Maps for charging stations.
Yes.
If you search charging stations near me in Google Maps, it'll show you all that's out there around you, which networks they are. So if you happen to have an EVgo account or a ChargePoint or Electrify America, you'll see that. And I think they're also working on getting information in there about whether the chargers are actually available if they're occupied.
Right. Well, so I did that about probably 2 years ago when I had an EV, and there is an EV charger secretly placed somewhere in a local shopping center because I drove all over and could not find that thing.
That is a problem I've experienced, especially out in California. There are often, there'll be chargers, at some mall tucked around in behind somewhere, and I've driven, when I've been in Petaluma, I've driven around. The first time I went to, there's a couple of EVgo chargers at the Petaluma Premium Outlet Mall, whatever. I had to drive around like twice before I finally found it.
Yes. Well, I finally left because I was like, and there was a sign with an arrow pointing in a general direction. And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. This is the problem with EVs. And I was talking with a friend who just did a trip he has an Ioniq, and he did the trip from like DC up to, I want to say, Long Island or New Jersey or something. Anyway, just, you had to charge about 5 times on fast chargers for the round trip. And so the cars and the range of the cars isn't the problem. It seems the real issue is the charging infrastructure and its its actual availability and convenience. And then there's some of the nonsense that goes on with the charging fees. So they'll charge you for like the hookup or whatever for the electricity, and they'll also charge you for the parking spot. So like it wound up being more expensive than gas.
Well, this is so there's a couple of things there. First of all, DC fast charging is actually expensive to do because of the demand charges, the way commercial customers are charged for electricity. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but it's inherently more expensive. The equipment's more expensive and the utilities charge more for the electricity. The other thing is, in some states, there's a bunch of states where where the state regulations on electric utilities don't allow the charging network providers to sell electricity by the kilowatt hour. They have to charge by the minute. Don't ask me why.
What?
It's just the way it is. Just about 2 or 3 weeks ago, Electrify America announced that they got approval from 23 states to switch over. So one of the things you may have noticed if you've ever used DC fast charging up until fairly recently was when you plugged in, you got charged by the minute, regardless of if you were at 75% charge and you wanted to just top it off before you head out on a trip. When you're at 75 or 80% charge, it's already ramping down the charge rate so that it takes a long time to fill up that last 20%, and you get charged by the minute, even though you're getting electricity very slowly, and it can be very expensive. But now,
happen? Oh, I'm sorry.
Now they have approval in 23 states to just charge directly per kilowatt hour. So just like you buy gas by the gallon, you buy electricity by the kilowatt hour, regardless of how many minutes it takes. And
you buy beer by the 6-pack.
Exactly. and then then the other thing that they do, and Electrify America also dropped the session charge, so the connection charge. So now you just hook up. However many kilowatt hours, that's what you pay for. But the other thing that most of them do is once the charging is complete and the battery is full, you typically have about a 10-minute grace period to unplug the car and move it. After that, they do start charging you a parking fee if you leave it sitting there plugged in.
Oh, I think that's totally fair.
Yeah,
I agree.
But not while you're actually charging.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So no, I think all those things are true. So it was interesting. I was investigating. I had seen these robotic chargers that like go to the car as opposed to the car going to the charge point.
You mean like a mobile charger?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, like a mobile charger. And they were really, really cool, but I hadn't seen anything for a while. And I had been talking to an executive about them, and he actually hadn't heard about them. So I was doing some research, and I discovered that Volkswagen actually is investing in this technology where you can the mobile battery goes to your car, like through an app, communicates. The car, it knows the car, your car is there. It goes to your car, charges it, in 15, 20 minutes, and then goes back to like a docking station, which is so clever because that addresses so many of the issues that we're talking about in terms of, first of all, it could certainly help with things like multi-dwelling housing or if you don't have a designated parking space, like imagine a street, if you're street parking, but each street has 2 or 3 of these robots, they can, like a street sweeper, right? Mm-hmm. They go car to car to car and recharge the vehicle. So
it's basically a big battery on wheels with a
right.
cord.
But it's very, very clever. And I think it really, really could change the face of this challenge of how do we get charging stations to people that don't have a garage or don't have a place, to put a charger and a 220 volt outlet, all those different barriers to charging. And I think it's really, really cool technology. And I think we'll see it very, very soon.
Yeah, I think we actually had a forecast on in our at Guidehouse in our most recent EV charging equipment forecast that we published, I think in June. We had a forecast for that, and we actually think the adoption is going to be fairly limited because of the cost. It's going to be mostly limited to places like parking garages. So it's probably not going to be the primary method of charging, but it does. It does have some it does have some interesting applications, the other thing, the manufacturers are starting to recognize this problem of how do you expand the market for EVs beyond people that live in a house with a driveway and a garage where they can plug in, and I think we talked about the announcement earlier in the summer that GM made with EVgo about installing DC fast chargers at places like grocery stores, locations where people go to anyway on a fairly regular
So you don't have to
basis.
make a special stop.
Yep. Yeah. And so, things like that. I mean, there's going to be a variety of different solutions. There's no silver bullet to this problem.
Right.
But I think as they roll out these solutions, it'll make it easier for more people to own EVs.
It will. So while we're on this topic, do we want to go around the garage first and then circle back to
Yeah.
the EV? Okay, great. So overall,
I want to find out.
Okay.
let's
finish up with the Kona EV, but I really want to find out about the Civic Type-R too. So
yeah, exactly. So overall, I mean, I think that the Kona Electric, I think it's a great example of good range, fairly fast charging, very zippy handling. It's been really fun to drive it. It does, when my niece, who's 12, when she was in the car with me, she's like, what is that sound? That whirring sound? Maybe we all just have really good, weird hearing, but that sound, she's like, the car sounds haunted. So she was not okay with the sound that it makes at low speed. And it's just, and she's right, like it's just sort of this weird noise. The Kona does have a lovely gentle chime when you are backing up, which obviously goes off then when you put it in drive. And the regenerative braking is quite aggressive. But what's weird about it is it doesn't actually let you come to a full stop without putting your foot on the brake.
Right.
So like a second, it's like it lets you do 1 foot driving, but then right up until the very end, all of a sudden it kind of releases. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that's exactly what it does. And
okay.
I think that's a mistake. I think that's.
I think so too.
It's Hyundai decided to do it that way. They want the drivers to actively put their foot on the brake, as it comes to a stop. And I think that's the wrong solution. I think the approach that Nissan and Chevrolet take with the Leaf and the Bolt,
right,
when you put them in high regen mode, is a better solution. Where it will actually come to a complete stop.
Right. Yes, because that's what I like, because I was sort of caught off guard. And of course, as we talked about before, these vehicles just get dropped off at our driveway and we kind of have to figure all this stuff out. And hopefully that's not going to be the case for a consumer buying them. But it is kind of annoying because, you're sitting at a traffic light and you've got to have your foot on the brake at all times. And
well, I think it does have a brake hold mode, doesn't it? Like there's a button on the dash where once you come to a stop and you apply the brake, you can, if you have that engaged, you can release the brake pedal and it'll just hold the pressure on the brake.
Okay,
So
I'll look tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, 'cause a lot of other cars do.
Yes, right. Well, that's the thing too, is that I think that a lot of cars have it automatically set, and so maybe I need to engage it, make sure that it's engaged.
It's usually not turned on by default. You usually have to manually press the button to engage it.
But overall, though, I think it's a fantastic vehicle. So just real quick on the specs, the base is $37,190. That's before the $7,500 federal tax credit. The one that I tested was $46,430 with including destination. I love the fact that it had heated and cooled seats, because there's definitely times when I didn't have to put the HVAC on. And so I was able to, save that for the battery and just use my heated or cooled seats. And that was awesome. I'm averaging about 4.5 miles per kilowatt. I have gotten as high as 5, and I am not hypermiling at all. I mean, I'm driving it like I normally do. It was funny. The first day I was nervous, because I was like, wow, 170, it was delivered with 170 miles. And I was like, that's kind of crazy. But then by the next day I was like, you know what? It's totally normal. I can just charge it at home. It's not a big deal. So, I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's really good. The price point is definitely high, because you are buying basically a hot hatch. It's not a hatch. It's like a crossover, a small crossover.
Horsepower.
I'm sorry?
It's 200 horsepower.
It is 200 horsepower. Yes. Yeah. It's 201 to be exact. So, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to drive. There's plenty of that instant torque, as we said, is all sorts of fun. So it's a good little car. I really like it.
I love the Kona, no matter what flavor. I love that thing.
Right? I love it
so
too.
Friendly.
It's so practical. It's practical, but I love the style of it.
Yeah.
The only issue I have with the Kona is the back seat is tight. It's quite tight for adults.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But the thing is, within the Hyundai Motor Group, if you need more backseat room, you can buy basically the exact same car from Kia as the Niro EV. It has the same battery, the same powertrain. It drives pretty much exactly the same, but it has about 3 inches of extra wheelbase compared to the Kona, and correspondingly 3 inches more rear legroom.
Right. No, that's a great suggestion. I love that. Yeah. So all sorts of fun. And Dan, as you said, I've sort of driven the Extreme, because then I also had the 2020 Honda Civic Type-R 6-speed manual transmission. And
with the giant picnic table wing.
Oh my gosh. So it was really funny. I picked it up when I got back from the Land Rover Defender event. So the Defender, we drove well over 500 miles in the course of just a couple of days. We had 2 hours of extra driving because of quarantine rules in Vermont that made us go back to New York State for the night, which we had not planned on doing. So I had done a lot of driving. And then I stopped at home because my sister, I wanted to show my sister and my brother the Defender. And then I went down to New Jersey. So by that Saturday, I had been beaten up. I was exhausted. And I realized that I've got the Type-R. And my first thought was, wow, I am really tired, and driving a manual is not my first choice. But I got in, I sat in it, and I wasn't even out of the parking lot, and I was like filled with adrenaline already. I wasn't even out of that JLR parking lot, and I'm like, this is just so fun. The 6-speed is so smooth. The clutch is so quick, but I tend to have a fairly low catch rate, if that makes like I catch it very early on and then have a slow release on the clutch. And it just, everything about it was so smooth. And initially when I was driving to the headquarters to pick up the vehicle, there was a lot of traffic. And I don't know, I must have made the traffic gods happy, because it all went away by the time I went to drive back. And I cruised over the Tappan Zee Bridge, which was wide open. I mean, it was just absolute driving pleasure.
And that new Tappan Zee, boy, that's nice. It's wider. There's not as many holes in the pavement. You can just
it's
really
gorgeous.
hammer down. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can hit one of the clover leaves at the end. So you go, is it over the Tappan Zee, and then you can hook up with the sawmill if you want to go? Well, you're not going north,
it's a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, you hook up with 87. So you come from 287, hooks
Right.
into, and then as you cross over the Tappan Zee Bridge, then you can hook up. Which goes over the Hudson River for those that are not nearby. Goes over the Hudson River, and then you can catch the New York Thruway, Taconic, all sorts of beautiful upstate.
Oh, the Taconic, yeah.
Upstate.
The Taconic's a
through
good
those
time.
clover leaves, you can practice your trail braking, and
Yeah.
because that car is great for trail braking. It's
my
awesome.
gosh. It is. It's absolutely awesome. So, there's just, what I love about it is there's just something so authentic and primal about having a manual transmission. Unless you're a total idiot, you can't be on your phone. You have to concentrate on driving. Like that's what you're doing, is that you are driving that car. And, the downshifting is awesome. It just, I don't know. It's just, it made me happy every single time I was in it. Every single time. It was just fun. I look in the rearview mirror and that ridiculously huge fin wing situation.
Yeah, but the wing, as ridiculous as that wing is from the outside of the car, from the inside, it basically disappears.
It does. I mean, but
because,
it's just, but it's there.
The way it's contoured, it actually, the shape of it actually follows the top edge of the rear window and the hatch. So, because if you look at it, you'll see it's exactly the same profile as the window.
It didn't intrude in my line of vision at all.
That's so typical Honda to make it practical and smart like that. God.
But it's just so this was what. So this is what I wrote in my review, which I have to publish still. And I said, direct steering inputs and a responsiveness that imparts happiness, often reserved for bacon or a good stout.
Or both. Or both. Yeah, I mean, so the thing that I like about every Civic, but especially the Type R, is that it really is one of those trainers. It's like a Miata in that sense too, where it's a car that teaches you all about driving, and feedback and feeling what the machinery is doing, and sort of the limits of your grip and weight transfer and all of those things without really cranking up the stakes too high. You could learn that kind of stuff in a Mustang, or it's something even more sporty like a Corvette or a 370Z, for example. But those cars are going to get you in trouble.
Yes.
When you explore those limits, and so by the time you're learning sort of what all that stuff feels like, you're in a situation where you're not going to be able to recover. Versus something like a Type R, which has high limits. Don't get me wrong; it's a good performing car, but it's a little bit more benign. GTI and Miata are also sort of the same way, where you get all that driving enjoyment out of it, and you're not really risking anything to actually extract some of that performance.
Yeah, no, it has this wide, really nice planted feel to it that you're right. It encourages you to kind of push your limits a little bit, but like I never felt like I was losing it. I never felt like, and of course, unfortunately I didn't get it on a track, but I never felt uncomfortable in it. And 306 horsepower. It's only a 2.0 liter, but 4-cylinder. And it's just, you can kind of beat it, and it takes it and loves it. And it's just, I mean, that thing.
The remarkable thing is it does that with front wheel drive.
That's front wheel drive, right?
That's what shocked me when I drove it, is how good it feels despite being front wheel drive. I mean, the Honda engineers did an amazing job on that front suspension. Yeah. And because there's really almost no torque steer at all in that thing. And it's so well balanced. It's just amazing.
It is. It's just so, it's one of those cars that it's a privilege to have it. I mean, I drove it every single day. I didn't care where I was going. I just drove around.
See, that's one of the good ones. That's
well, it's so funny because as I was writing my review, so it's not, as I said, it's not quite done yet. So I've got 120 words written, and I wrote that in 2 seconds. I just.
Well, I mean, your reviews are not exactly War and Peace, you got 80 left.
Well, trust me, it's a lot harder to write something in 200 words or less than it is to write 2,000 words.
No, I love that brevity is. Please continue, but
there are some cars, God bless them, that it's like, okay, what am I going to say about this without using the word fine?
Sometimes that's all that needs to be said, though.
This was not one of them. No. So did I give the pricing? So the pricing $36,995, tested $37,950, and just worth every penny.
Yeah, I mean that's right on top of a GTI.
Yeah.
So, and it's just it's a different flavor, but they're both kind of tasty.
Well, what was crazy too, and it was actually, this reminded me. So I had stopped over at a little park to take some pictures, and these two older women, clearly, I would say early 70s, and they're kind of walking. They're both walking, and they're sort of helping each other, and they come over to look at my bright blue crazy hatch, and they start talking. And I said, it's actually a manual. And the woman, and this, 70-something, she goes, well, I can drive a manual, of course. I'm like, of course you can. But then we were like opening up the hatch, and it's like, look how much room there is in this thing. You put the back seats down and you can swallow anything you buy at IKEA. I mean, that's what's really great about it too, is that it has so many different personalities that, it is, as we talked about, typical Honda. It's very, very practical. And yet there's so much fun to it as well. But so, yeah, those cute little ladies, they're my heroes.
Yeah, they were stumbling home from a pub crawl, like passing the flask back and forth. I just didn't see it.
Oh, they were awesome. So those are my two rigs.
That's good. Well, let's stay with the sports cars. Sam, you had the 2020 Toyota 86 GT.
Yeah, I did. It's been, probably, I guess, about 4 or 5 years since I drove one of these last time. And the last time I drove one, it was still called the Scion FRS. So this is, the car, Rebecca, you drove it a few months ago in the Kona edition.
Yes.
The one I had was just the standard GT in white, which is, an unfortunate color because it's kind of dull, but it is what it is. But the car itself is great. It's a hoot to drive, and the GT is the loaded one. It's got the wing on the back and the bigger 18-inch wheels, which I think are a reasonable size. They're not oversized. I think the car's got great proportions. I wish that Toyota and Subaru and other manufacturers would forget about trying to put a ridiculous little back seat in there. Just stop. Make it a nice carpeted, package shelf and leave it at that. But at any rate, it's got a 6-speed manual transmission. The Toyota or the Subaru 2-liter Boxer with 205 horsepower. It's got both direct injection and port injection, rear-wheel drive, as a proper sports car should be. I think this car's got great proportions. It's a great-looking little car. This one had the TRD handling package with sax dampers and the big bright red Brembo calipers on it.
Did it have the stupid loud TRD exhaust on it?
It did have the TRD exhaust system, which is unfortunate. I would strongly recommend that I highly recommend the 86 and the BRZ if you're looking for a reasonably priced sports car that isn't a convertible, unfortunately, but definitely don't get the TRD exhaust. It doesn't add any performance, and it's just annoying. This thing was so loud, just too loud. So I would definitely go without that. But everything else, heated seats, and so my daughter has been considering buying one to replace her 12-year-old Honda Fit, and if she gets one, she wants to get the GT because that's the only one that has the heated seats. There's the standard audio system in here. It's not a Toyota Entune system. It's just a very basic 7-inch touchscreen radio, 4 buttons on the side, for power, one to turn off the display, and then just pause up and down, plus and minus for volume control. Very simple to use. Actual physical buttons, not touch sensitive, not capacitive, but the screen is capacitive. It's got support for Android Auto and CarPlay. The gearbox, not quite as slick as the one in the Type-R, but still great to drive. Really nicely balanced. I did find one weird little issue, though, using Android Auto in this thing, which is for some reason, if I went to hit pause on something I was listening to, it would pause momentarily and then immediately resume playing. It would not stay paused, which...
It really liked whatever podcast you were listening to.
Yeah, or music or whatever else was playing.
Like, I want to know how this ends.
Yeah. But aside from that, really, I didn't really have any other complaints. The GT has, a little more heavily bolstered seats in it, that are really nicely supportive when you're driving swiftly. I won't say aggressively, but swiftly. You also in the GT, the base models have just 2 analog gauges for speedometer and tach. The GT, the right gauge, has a 4-inch LCD display built into it as well that you can page through and get extra information. Get your trip computer on there. You can get a friction circle, that you can look at. There's a lap timer that's built in there. So if you're doing a track day, you can get that in there. So it's a reasonably practical car. Between the trunk, the trunk is not real deep, but it's actually pretty decent size. You can certainly fit at least 5 or 6 bags of groceries in there. And then, you also have that back seat that you can also store stuff in. So, if you're going on a little road trip, weekend getaway, you can throw a couple of duffel bags in the back there too. So, it's a fantastic car. And just this week, teasers started showing up for the reveal of the 2022 BRZ. Excuse me. And there will be a new 86 coming as well. Not sure when Toyota is going to show their version of it, but the BRZ should be revealed in full probably in the not too distant future. Hasn't really fundamentally changed, in terms of the overall shape. Similar kind of profile to it. Apparently, we'll have a slightly larger 2.4 liter engine with about 225 horsepower.
People are still going to complain.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's enough. It's plenty of power.
I mean, it's enough now. Look, that 2 liter makes 100 horsepower per liter.
Yeah,
that's
it's great.
That's a lot of power. I get the torque dip thing. I don't like it either. But just keep your foot in it. I promise it gets better.
Yeah, it's you really. I mean, you really don't notice it most of the time.
You get used to it.
Yeah.
It is kind of annoying, but it's also one of those cars that there's the aftermarket that can help remove some of that with a tune. Mm-hmm. And not that I recommend putting a tune on a car that you're like paying a loan on and have
But I mean, 200 horsepower is really,
plenty.
It's plenty for almost
and in
everything.
that car, like
For
that's
a car
another
that size,
car,
and with a manual transmission as well.
Yeah,
I mean, you should be able to.
You can have a blast with this car.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's another one of those cars like the Type-R, right? It's a trainer.
Yeah.
It's and it's really fun to drive. Every time I've gotten one, it's been better than the last time. Like they have continually sort of improved it and tweezed it, sometimes in very small ways, but it does make a difference. The last one I was in was nicer than the first one I had. That I think the first 86 I drove was a Scion FRS, and that was probably the worst way to experience that car. And the last one I drove was actually pretty nice. They've added some padding and different upholstery in areas. So it looks a little more premium, feels better to the touch. It's comfortable. It's easy to see out of. I think it looks good. It's fun to drive. So
yeah,
it is one of those sort of all arounders that it's not quite as well rounded as the Civic with the hatch, but it really is. It's a car that you can use as a sports car, or you can commute in it, or it does have that functional trunk. So I really like it. I hope they don't mess it up with the new generation.
I don't think they will. I think it's I think it's going to be pretty close to the same thing. So
I think also,
I'm not too concerned about it.
For 31,000, I look at this car and think it's such a great weekend car. I do wish it had a convertible or at least a sunroof, but it's still, our lives have changed so much that we're spending so much time more at home that this is just the kind of car that I picture throwing a bag in and just going for a drive, right? Just ending up someplace on the weekend just to get out of your house, if nothing else. But it's sort of like the anti-SUV. It's your little sanctuary that you can go out, go driving in it, just clear your head a little bit, and just simplify your life a little bit. Again, get away from technology and just go and have a good driving experience and come back and go back to the slog afterwards. But, for 30 grand, I think it's just a lot of fun.
Save the $1,100 on the exhaust system.
Yeah, exactly.
The one I had, the GT starts at 30 grand. You can also get the base model starting at like 27.5, I think. And this particular one came to 34,783 delivered.
Okay, so the Kona that I had was 30,008 delivered.
Yeah, so you probably didn't have the TRD handling package, which is $1,270, or the exhaust system, which is $1,100. You can really skip both of those, the handling package and the exhaust system. It's really good even without them. But I think it's a great car, and if you don't need if you're not a convertible person, if you're if you're a convertible person, obviously Miata is the answer.
Obviously.
But if you don't care about convertibles, you'd rather have a hardtop, this is an outstanding alternative to a Miata.
Absolutely.
It's got most of the same traits that you find in a Miata, in just a little bit different form factor.
For sure.
Yeah, I do think it's funny because I'm a person who does not really care about convertibles, but I would still pick the Miata because it's that particular feeling and just liveliness and just blend of traits. So it's not that the 86 is bad; it's just different. So I'm glad that we have options and both are fun. So.
What about you, Dan?
You had a very interesting vehicle.
It was interesting. It was cool. So I had the Transit 150 all-wheel drive EcoBoost, and I had the cargo version. So just two seats. So like you, I had a two-seater.
Yeah.
But,
did you offer candy to children?
I did not.
That's like several years ago when we helped my daughter move a previous time. I got a red Ram ProMaster from FCA, and it was a cargo version as well. And I described it I put the headline in my review was something like driving a red Italian two-seater.
Yeah,
because the ProMaster is built in Italy.
That's true. The Transit is sort of part of this newer crop of vans where it's actually really good to drive as far as vans go. I have recently spent time in a much older Ford E-Series. I think it was like an E350. I mean, it was it was quaint.
The E-Series hasn't fundamentally changed since about 1975.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So tell us about it though. Like what was it like?
Well, the Transit is super well thought out. It's really roomy in terms of cargo. It's got a really nice flat floor, really square cargo area.
Does it still have a ridged floor?
Yeah, there's like the floor has a corrugated pattern, but this also had a like a mat, so it was covered. It wasn't just a bare floor, and it's a little loud without anything in it. The last Transit I drove was a passenger version that had a little more sound deadening and stuff, but this is a really great box on wheels. And I was actually surprised how quiet it is on the highway. Like it's still a little boomy because it resonates a bit over rough pavement.
Is there a partition or anything, or is it just open all the way? Wow.
No, it's just open all the way back.
Fascinating.
We could have filled it with balloons or.
Did you feel like you should have like a not for hire sign on the back of it?
I felt like I should have picked up like extra work.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, sure. I could make a deal with like the local Amazon driver or something.
Exactly.
Could split it. How are you so efficient? It's my secret weapon. But the thing about that old E-Series was, there's not as much places to put your stuff. The foot boxes are cramped because you get the giant hump for the engine and stuff. Not as much with the Transit. It's wider. There's a lot more room for things. The seats were actually very comfortable. The driving position was decent. The visibility is fantastic. There's lots of cup holders and cubbies, and you get used to the handling characteristics. So you can actually, it's got a short nose. You can sort of get out into the intersection before you cut the wheel, or maneuvering it becomes easier. And new on this one that wasn't on the last Transit I drove was it has drive modes. So I preferred Eco among all of them. It has drive modes for like slippery conditions and just normal. But Eco kind of smooths out the responses, so you're not getting that sort of head snap from the engine as you take off. And it had the 2.7 liter EcoBoost, which is fantastic. So it's a great powertrain. It's a good van. It's still, sometimes we get a little overexcited as us car people, and we look at these vans and we're like, well, that's neat and kind of weird and different, and I would like to own one of those. You would not want to daily this. Maybe the passenger version you would, but the cargo version.
If you did something, like did a conversion van.
If you did a conversion or made it a camper, like it's a perfect blank slate for a DIY camper, that's different, But as it stands without much weight in it, and it's a 150, but it's still like it rides like a work vehicle. It's not bad, but it's a truck,
I can promise you that I've never wanted one of these.
Well, I can see that.
If you've ever had to move house, you want one of these.
Yeah, no, but temporarily. But yes. I don't want this in my stable of options.
So my grandfather for years had Volkswagen vans, the old air-cooled ones, and then eventually he bought himself a brand new van again. And so there's just, there's a thread through my appreciation for vans. And it just,
you're such an everyman sometimes. I love it.
Yeah, I am. I'm a man of the people, remember? And this is just it's a good substitute for those older funky vans.
So is it the same? And I should know this, I apologize. Is it about the same size as an Econoline?
No, it's
smaller.
It's bigger.
No, it's bigger.
It's bigger. Oh, I'm thinking of like the 15 passenger.
So yeah, you can get a Transit that's that big, that's longer. It's going to have the higher roof, but this was a low roof. It's the lowest roof and the shortest one. So it probably casts about the same shadow as the E Series, the Econoline did, but it's a little wider. It's boxier, and I think it's probably a little taller.
How was the fuel economy?
Like 18, 17.
Which roof
terrible.
did you have on yours? Because you have it in three roof heights.
Yeah, I had the standard roof height, so the low, not the mid or the high, just the low roof. The last one I had the mid roof, and that was, I got on the sawmill with that, and you're not supposed to take high stuff on the sawmill because it was designed by Robert Moses. Well, I don't actually, the sawmill might not have been Moses. Anyway, it was designed to keep those city folk out of the suburbs there, so they put low bridges so buses couldn't go, and they haven't been redesigned since the 30s. So you get on there and you realize, hey, that bridge looks like I'm going to scalp the top of this thing. We're going to get off and just take the surface streets. So this one would not have that problem. You could take this in other places. But, the biggest deal here is that it has all-wheel drive. That's new this year. And I think that was sort of the missing component for the Transit, was they were all rear-wheel drive, which is fine with, winter tires and stuff. But I think that to make it more all-purpose, all-wheel drive is a really killer addition to the van, and it's seamless, and it adds those driving modes, and gives it more flexibility and more capability. And I think if you're running a fleet of these things, that's sort of a motivation to buy. Right. Versus, some other vans. The ProMasters are decent because they're front wheel drive. So that has a certain edge. At least the smaller ProMasters. I don't know if the big ones are.
The big ones are also front wheel drive.
Yeah. So you have a traction advantage there. But I think you probably lose out in some way versus the Transit maybe in capacity or towing or whatever. They're very evenly matched, and I think actually the ProMaster is even a little roomier. It's just carved out a little more.
Yeah, well, the ProMaster's floor, I think, is a little bit lower than the Transit because front-wheel drive, you don't have a drive shaft running down to the back, so they can
it has a
lower
very
the floor
simple
a
beam
bit.
axle, right?
Yeah.
The
Yep.
axle in the ProMaster is like just it's a leaf spring and a rod.
Yeah, basically.
There's not much to it. But no, I mean, the Transit, I love that they sort of took the inspiration or just basically the exact vans from Europe that were a little bit more maneuverable and just differently designed and brought them over here. Because the Econolines, they were good for what they were, but that's a truck van, like
Yeah. Well, these are unibodies. They're not body on frame like the old Econolines were.
yeah,
which is,
and that makes it better.
Yeah,
I think.
it's much better packaged. Even though I think the floor is a little bit higher in this than the ProMaster, it's still way lower than the floor in the Econolines. So you actually have a lot more interior volume, even with the same footprint.
Yeah, and I mean, it's easy to get in and out of. All of those things that matter after you're putting miles on both yourself and the van.
Well, and there's going to be more safety features in this thing too. Just even like the backup camera, things like that are just going to make it easier and safer to maneuver around in it.
Yeah, it had it did have the backup camera. The one thing I will say with the cargo version is because you don't have all the windows, it's still you got to be kind of careful. It had big mirrors and the convex mirror or convex mirror.
You don't want a concave mirror.
Yeah, no. Yeah. So that you could sort of see around pretty well. And it also has it's got the automated parking functions and stuff. So there's a lot to it that when you start to dig in, Ford really wants to own commercial vehicles, and they've made all of their commercial vehicles, all their fleet stuff is very good and very well thought out, and this is no different. It's a very comprehensively, thoughtfully designed van. I will be pleased to get something a little quieter and a little smoother riding, but if you had to spend every day using this, it would be fine, and I think it would actually be good with a little bit of weight in it. It would smooth out the ride, so it's just a good work vehicle. And that doesn't
throw a sofa in there and a couple of things.
Yeah, I mean, for most users, unless you're getting one of these from your local U-Haul, and picking it up empty to move stuff, most of the commercial users that are going to use this thing are going to have stuff in there. Plumbers and electricians and whoever, they're going to have tools and parts and all their, they're going to have racks in the back, for
everything
all their
that
equipment.
rattles. You hit one bump and the whole thing is.
Yeah, but still, it's going to be a little more buttoned down because you have all that weight in the back.
Yeah, well, and this, or they're going to take it to an upfitter. And get, or they'll probably do both. Take it to the upfitter, get the racks and stuff, and then. Use it for years. It's an evolution in work vehicles, and I'm glad that it's here, and that the fuel economy didn't disappoint me. I was pleased that it was getting 17 miles to the gallon, 17 and a half, 18. So those aren't bad numbers for what it was, and I didn't do a ton of driving in it, and mostly around town. So on the highway, you could probably get it up above 20.
How did you like the 10-speed?
Oh, it's seamless. The powertrain is fantastic.
Okay.
This powertrain in everything is just good.
That's awesome.
So yeah, well, I did not have a sports car. It was mostly
had a rear-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive 2-seater. That counts.
Yeah, all-wheel drive 2-seater.
Totally.
Yeah, it's nice shade of silver.
Twin turbo V6. I mean,
right.
You got all the right check marks on the check.
Listen,
you got all the list, everything on the checklist.
If you're really brave, you can get one of these things sideways.
Two seats, twin turbo V6, all-wheel drive. It's just like a Nissan GTR.
It's totally Tinder worthy.
Yeah.
I mean,
and you could bring along. You could park a GTR
there.
in the back.
I'm just saying, air mattress. All right. We're going to leave it at that. Let's move on before we get ourselves into trouble. Okay, so why don't we circle back? We had talked about EVs, and before we get too cold, like, do we want to talk about Rebecca's thoughts about California going all EV? Because I think this is kind of a lot of much ado about not a whole lot with the mandate from Governor Newsom. But give us the outlines, and we'll fill in with our outrageous opinions.
Well, so thinking about this, so for our listeners who may not follow the industry in the weeds like we do, Governor Gavin Newsom of California, he announced back on September 23rd that as of 2035, the state, California, is banning the sale of new gasoline-powered vehicles. So this doesn't mean that you can't buy a used vehicle, because you can. It's just the new ones. And, there was some uproar and this and that. So I decided, as I was thinking about this, because in my past and hopefully future life, I really am an analyst when I look at the industry, and that's my forte. And so I was thinking about this and thinking about product planning. This is only two car cycles away, basically. And so I decided to look back a little bit, because as you look back, you learn what could come forward. And so I thought about, 15 years ago in 2005, and a couple of high points. This is available on my site, Sam. What's my site?
RebeccaDrives.com.
Thank you.
and what you want to do is you want to click on the reflections link at the top of the page, and that'll take you to the article.
To my very first blog post. So basically, 15 years ago, Facebook was just starting out. YouTube was just launching. Nokia was the most popular phone. Internet was only 10 years old. And Lotus had signed a deal with Tesla for these glider things. So my point of kind of going back was to think about how far we've come in 15 years. And I always look at who's in the marketplace also demographically. So baby boomers were the dominant cohort. In 2005, they had just turned 60 years old. The youngest one was only 41. So, it was this really dynamic market in terms of technology just starting to get its wits about it. But the baby boomers were really in the midst of market control. So when we look at where we are today, of course, the internet is now, access to the internet's a human right. 70% of all adults use Facebook, and YouTube, even more use YouTube.
And the baby boomers are still ruining everything. I'm sorry. Got me off track. I'm sorry. Carry on.
There's actually a third less gasoline stations than in 2005, which I thought was interesting.
That's good.
Right? But the thing is that so baby boomers are actually 75 now. And this is what kind of freaked me out. In 2035, the millennials, who we still think of as living in their parents' basements, are going
nonsense,
to be 60. They're going. Right. They're nearing. They're nearing their 60s, certainly in their late 50s. So I separated the millennials into three separate groups, and I think I've kind of touched on this before. But and basically, I look at them and think, okay, you can't group these people all together because technology has had such a profound impact on their lives. So what I call the trophy generation, 78 to 88, the online generation, 89 to 99 birth year, and then generation app, which is every kid born in the 2000s. And when we think about who's in the marketplace today, it's a mixture of people, much more so than it's ever been. And in 15 years, we're really going to be dominated by trophies, by online generation, and starting to be by generation app. So we have to think about what this looks like in 15 years. And, as we talked about earlier at the beginning of the show, things like charging stations and infrastructure and, how much progress we could potentially make in 15 years, I think this really could become a reality. I think that this is something that has a lot of legs to it. I think that younger people expect vehicles to be energy efficient, to be environmentally responsible, to be corporate responsible. So I think that this really has some legs to it, and it's not quite as outrageous as it seems when we first hear about it. So hopefully that wasn't too much in the weeds. I'm sorry.
No, but
definitely.
Come on, trophy generation. There's no more generation that's had its ass kissed than the baby boomers, and that's anyway.
No, it's the trophy. It's the children of the baby boomers.
I am a child of baby boomers.
They were the helicopter. They were the kids that were raised by helicopter parents.
Sure, but I think too, like the demographics aside, I think it's what do we want to invest in, and so I like the idea that like by 2035, they're trying to sort of shape behavior with, legislation, and that's it sounds bad when you put it in those terms, but that's been very effective. And I think if we want to divorce our energy systems from the old way and really latch onto renewables, which have shown over the last, 4 or 5 years that, renewables are cheaper than coal, which had been the cheapest energy source for a very long time. We need to make sure that there's reasons to adopt this stuff, and EVs sort of further divorce us from fossil fuels. So I think that's good. We're always going to need cars. And it's not like they're going to completely legislate gas cars off the road. It's just the sale of
new ones.
You'll
still be able to drive your 67 Chevelle.
Yeah. But the caveat that I do say at the end, and I wanted to keep this short and I didn't want to get into it, is the grid. I mean, the electric grid does need to be improved, certainly in states like California,
especially in
where,
California.
They have brownouts all the time now. So my point, the point of the blog was that I do think that from a market standpoint and from a demographic standpoint, that the audience will be there, that people will be willing to look at EVs and in fact may even expect them to be there. But the grid has to be ready for them, because I think infrastructure will come along. I think the range certainly will come along. The barriers won't be market driven. They're going to be resource driven. They're going to be things like the electric grid.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that, I'm sorry, Sam, I didn't mean to interrupt, but if you look at the sort of biggest barrier and problem, other than sort of charging being difficult, like it's still a pain to charge the cars, like you were talking about earlier. The other issue is those grid operators. The PG&E, one of those wildfires was sparked by a wire actually sagging. They have hooks for the ground wires, and after a while the hooks wore through, and somebody did like a sort of a study that was like, look at this hook. Okay, look at how long it's been. Look at what they did at some point, because they knew that there was a lot of wear on this tower. And, it turns out like the sort of hook that held the wire was like 100 years old.
Yeah.
And so it's just
crazy.
neglect from the infrastructure. It's like, you should have replaced that a long time ago, PG&E, and you should have known that it was like that. Like you get paid, you have the sort of, you are the utility. And that was irresponsible of you, and we're relying on you to keep up your part of the bargain, and it's that sort of balance that we've been sort of told for a long time, that consumer behavior is the real solution to climate issues, and all we have to do is adopt EVs and everybody reduce their consumption. But really, there's a lot on the industry side that needs to come along that has sort of been swept under the rug. And they need to do a better job about being resistant to, maintaining their stuff and not just vacuuming out, profit. It costs money to generate all that shareholder value. And eventually, if you don't maintain your stuff, it comes back to bite you. And here we are. So I hope that it actually does drive improvements to the grid, because it should.
And I think it will. The utilities increasingly are, they're recognizing, the opportunities that are available with EV adoption, in order to sell more electricity. They realize that there's a significant business opportunity for them. And so they're, my employer, Guidehouse, we do, as a consulting firm, and this is not something, it's not an area I work on, but as a firm, they do a lot of work with a lot of utilities, especially investor-owned utilities like PG&E and others. And, so there's absolutely a lot of interest in what do they have to do to support the adoption of EVs, because they actually want EVs to be adopted, because that's a market for the power that they're producing. And but they recognize that they do have to upgrade things in order to enable that. So part of that is things like putting in demand response systems, to be able to manage where the power is going and when, when there's peaks in demand, to be able to shut off, things like some of the chargers, or reduce the power output to some of the chargers, to balance the load, so you don't run into the brownout problems. And they're working on that, and hopefully, well before 2035, they'll have a lot of those issues sorted out. There's enough power generation capacity available to support all those EVs, but it's getting it from where it's produced to where it's being used in those vehicle batteries that has been the challenge, and that's something that everybody's taking a look at, and doing increasingly looking at things like vehicle to grid integration. This is something that was talked about back 12, 13 years ago when we were just starting to get into this new age of EVs. And there's been various pilot projects, but nothing has been really implemented at scale, because frankly there haven't been enough EVs to make it worthwhile. And there's actually 3,000 separate utilities across the United States, and they all have different systems, and managing that has been a nightmare. But what's happening now is, especially as commercial fleet operators are looking towards electrification, that is potentially a really a good source to be able to do vehicle to grid integration, where vehicles that are plugged in can actually be a buffer to when there's peaks on the peak loads on the demands on the demand side, to be able to draw a little bit of power out of those batteries and balance that out, shave off those peaks. There's a lot of interesting work being done there, and for those fleets that are operating in a specific area, I think that's where you'll start to see some of those sorts of ideas get implemented. So I think there's a lot of good opportunities for business across the board from this stuff.
There
so
is.
What do you think, Rebecca? Do you think that are we optimists? I mean, we are clearly being our men of the people here.
No, I think that it's first of all, there's also business opportunities, because there's a lot of a legitimate concern about what do we do with all these batteries, but those batteries actually have a second life to them. So I remember years ago now, I was at a Chevy Volt event, and all of the tents that we were in and the lighting and everything was actually using old batteries from the Chevy Volt, which was really cool. So there's opportunity there to figure out, how do we use these batteries again? What's the second life for them? So I think that there's a lot of opportunity. Having lived in Saudi Arabia, obviously I'm very aware of the role of oil, but also the limitations of oil availability. And, I put solar panels on my own house. I've heavily insulated the house so that my energy usage is probably cut by more than half from the time that I bought the house, when it really didn't have any proper insulation in it. I have no idea how they lived here without it. But I think that there's measures that everybody can take and should take, as much as you can afford, to limit your own use and not waste. I mean, when you think about wind, there's challenges with wind because it can be really inconsistent. But I think that we need to explore these resources. I was really disappointed. I remember when in Massachusetts, they were going to put a wind farm off of the Cape Cod coast, and it didn't get passed because people were like, I don't want a wind turbine thing.
There was, as usual, there's a lot of corporate chicanery behind that.
There was. But I think that we have to look at these things as necessities like cell phone towers, right? You know, I was on a walk this afternoon with my sister, and all of a sudden I looked up, and near where I went to middle school, of all places, and there's a cell phone tower like right behind the school now. And you know, but that's why we have cell phone coverage, because we need those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
I think that, you know, there's a responsibility that we have as citizens of the world to take care of it, to do our part in it. Certainly corporations have a responsibility to use their profits wisely, to certainly maintenance. For goodness sake, take care of your stuff. Like, it's like a house, right? You can run it into the ground if you don't take proper maintenance and care and maintenance of your house. You know, a house is not, I mean, anyone thinks that they're going to buy a brand new house and there's not going to be projects is kidding themselves, right?
A house is a money pit, no matter if it's new or old.
It is.
Well, I think if you do the math too, like that's a really great metaphor, because a house is not really an investment vessel, and that if you actually calculate out and adjust the dollars for inflation, you generally only break even, or, you know, when you account for, you know, maintenance, upkeep, and improvements to a house over the long term. The difference is you put mortgage into it, and then when you need a lump sum, you sell the asset, and then you get the lump sum. And because of inflation has happened over, you know, the 30 years you've owned the house, you get a pretty decent lump sum, and hopefully at that point you haven't been stupid and overextended yourself. So it can be a container for wealth, but it shouldn't be your only container for wealth. And like when you own and run a sort of a utility, it should be the same thing. Like, yes, there's profit to be had there, but you also have to make sure that you keep it up.
Well, you can't do the profit at the expense of the maintenance.
Well, yeah, right,
well,
exactly.
If you want that profit to persist over the long haul,
right?
you have to
maintain. Just like with a house,
you can't just think about the next quarter.
Right, that lump sum is going to be a lot smaller in your house if you haven't maintained it. Mm-hmm. You know,
well, yeah, unless the market booms artificially, and then you can sell any old shithole for $1 zillion. Like,
but so I think that, you know, the reason I wanted to write the article was because in 15 years, the people that are in the marketplace are very different. And I think that we have a responsibility, utility companies have a responsibility, states have a responsibility to have the grids ready, to have renewable energy ready. You know, the industry, we're going to, I think, continue to build and improve on EVs. I mean, that Hyundai Kona is a fantastic example of taking something that 10 years ago was kind of weird and sort of inadequate, like, you know, the Nissan Leaf, right? It was weird, different. It had
74 miles of
74 mile, right? To this thing that, again, looks exactly like any other Kona on the road, and 260 miles of range. That's impressive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And like, honestly, those are jobs. Those are profits.
Yeah.
Like, stop just doing the same thing over and over again for 100 years. Like, just you could do other stuff and you'll make money. For Christ's sake. All right.
Just for our listeners, I have to tell you that Dan's hair was kind of nice and neat at the beginning, and it's now
is
not.
It fuzzy?
Yeah.
It's fuzzy.
Oh yeah, look at that. Yeah.
As he's running it through his
yeah. Look, I'm passionate about this. We should all, you know, because it doesn't really change our life, right? You're driving technology. It's energy. If we can make everything electric, it's power agnostic at that point, because it's just electricity. So, you know, it doesn't mean that we can't have fun in cars if they're electric. It means that, like, we can breathe.
They just won't sound as good.
Yeah, they won't sound
they'll
as good.
sound different. Yeah.
But nobody loses if the air is cleaner.
No.
Right?
We're all better off.
Except for those people who profit from pollution, because they don't want to change what they're doing.
Oh, come on.
My two kids are both adults now, and you know, they frequently show, you know, they're stressed about the state of the world. You know, they're they're showing signs of real anxiety, because they honestly don't think that we're going to be able to survive as a species for another 20 years because of what we have done to this planet. So we need to make changes.
My kids look around, my daughter's 15 and my son's 12, and they look around and like, why would you do things like that? Like, it doesn't make sense to them. Like, why, like, you don't shit where you eat. Like, why would you do that? It's like, I don't have the good answer. I agree with you, and it's messed up, and we've been trying to change it for a long time.
But I think that age group also has never felt more empowered to make those changes, which is really cool.
The kids are going to save us.
Right? No, but they do.
So. I
think they feel really empowered to make those changes, to make good decisions, to make decisions. They feel like they could, whether it's the who they buy from, the corporate responsibility, they have that information at their fingertips, and they have the opportunity to execute on those decisions. And
that's actually been really rewarding, is to teach them that stuff. It's like, it's so funny because like we make it a practice. We don't buy from Walmart. I don't like the way they treat women. I don't like a lot of their corporate practices. I don't like the way they beat the hell out of their suppliers every year for a cost reduction. Like, that's completely just nonsense. You can't make something a percentage cheaper every year. That's not how it works. But that's what they demand. And so it's like, well, I'm not going to give them my business. And so I explain that to the kids, and they're like, why can't we do this? Well, I don't want to spend my money with them.
Right.
But
I like that. I mean, that's the thing, is that is, you are empowered to do that, to make those choices. And, thinking, 22, 23 years old, it's 25 years ago, we didn't feel empowered by that, right? We didn't have that kind of information.
Well, we were Gen Xers, right? So we were beaten.
Yeah. And but we didn't have that kind of information. And so I think that empowering children to be able to execute on those, so that they aren't worried, so they're not concerned, so they feel like they're taking action, they feel like they're making a difference. I think that sort of feeling they have at a much younger age than we did. That's just my impression.
All right. Well, I'm going to climb down off my soapbox now, and we can get on to the other topics.
All right. We got one more before we hit some listener mail.
All right. I see. I was looking at my hair. Let me just change windows. So the Nissan Rogue, right?
Yeah.
Nissan Rogue first drive. That
thing's
today.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
it does.
good.
It does look really good. And especially when you see it in person, it's a really nice evolution. New direction to Nissan's design language. It adopts some of what we've seen them do the last year and a half or so on the sedans, on the Maxima, Versa, and Sentra. A little more, sharply creased metal, kind of flatter surfaces, almost kind of an origami kind of thing.
Did they explain the design idea behind it at all? We had a little presentation from Nissan. So that, like, the idea is when you're someplace and you see it drive by, it's the roof line.
Yeah.
It has that sort of coupe suggestion to it that looks sporty. It was an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And when you have it explained to you and you think about it, like, okay, so the idea is that you're seeing only part of the car, and it just sort of has a sporty signature to it, even as it's a CUV. And so the bottom part of the body is, sort of, it's not less important, but they really, they emphasize that the swoop of the roof line. It was interesting.
Yeah, you listened.
Whatever.
You listened well.
Yeah,
I did.
I mean, it looks good. It looks good.
It does look good.
And I like, again, that they're continuing with the two-tone thing, the contrasting roof color availability. It's still got a little bit of that floating roof thing that Nissan's been doing for a few years, where you've got the black bar through the C-pillar that kind of separates the roof from the pillar. So it, design-wise, great. It's a really nice update. One of the interesting things that they mentioned about the design, they described the grille, for the last, 6, 7, 8 years now on Nissans, who've had this, what they call their V-motion grille, that strip of chrome that goes under and up the sides, of the grille. And they they wanted to make the grille a little bit more prominent, as has kind of been the trend in recent years, but without making it overwhelming. And, so it's actually not substantially larger than what we see on some other recent Nissans. But rather than make that chrome strip, much wider, to get that visual prominence there, what they actually did was they basically kept the main part of it roughly the same thickness as it was before, but added a second narrow chrome strip parallel to it around the outside of it. So the overall effect is that it's a little more visually out there without being kind of too overwhelming about it. And I think it actually works really well. So I think that was actually one of the nicest visual touches I think that they did on there.
It's almost like a double matte on a frame.
Yeah, exactly. So design, good. Interior, much better than before. Big upgrade on the interior. I got a chance to drive it for a couple hours. One of the first things I noticed, one of my big gripes, as you may recall, on a lot of Nissans, is the really low quality center touchscreens they use. The displays, low contrast. They just don't look good. They're not very responsive. They've got a much better display on this one, so it's a much nicer touchscreen, easily visible through polarized sunglasses, which is always a good thing. Was fairly resistant to glare, which has been a problem on a lot of the Nissan screens. So they definitely addressed that. The powertrain, is not radically different from before. Just minor upgrades, but good. The NVH is definitely much improved. The engine's quieter than before. The structure is stronger, and they did some tweaks in the suspension, to improve isolation. So there's less road noise. This I think compares very favorably to a lot of other vehicles in this class. So I think it is really nice to drive in. The seats are really comfortable. Everything about it is just, significantly improved from before.
It sounds like the same kind of.
I love it. I love the
yeah.
exterior of it. I think that front end is really nice.
They've done a really good job on the last couple of vehicles that they've restyled and redone. It sounds like the same sort of improvement plan that the Versa underwent that really impressed me as well. They sort of took the same basic pieces and just restyled them and rethought them into a much more pleasant
it's conceptually not different from what they had before, but everything is just executed better and more refined, and that's a good thing. The problem is this is a segment that is so competitive. I mean, this is one of the biggest segments in the industry now. About 4 million compact crossovers sold in the U.S. last year.
Wow.
Almost a quarter of the market.
Wow.
And that's, you've got vehicles like the RAV4 and the CR-V and the Escape, and there's a new Hyundai Tucson coming, and probably a new Sportage not too far down the road from Kia, and it's a
Jeep.
It's a tough, and Jeep, it's a tough segment, and this is a really, really good vehicle. But there was nothing about it that really set it out from the crowd. It's absolutely 100% competitive in every respect, almost every respect. One thing where I think that they made a mistake, which was not having an electrified powertrain option from the beginning. Toyota last year, almost a quarter of RAV4s that they sold. RAV4 was their best-selling nameplate in North America. They sold over 400,000 RAV4s last year. 100,000 of those almost were hybrids, and now they also have a plug-in hybrid. Ford is selling a lot of hybrid Escapes. They've got the plug-in hybrid coming. Honda's got a hybrid CR-V. They did acknowledge that, yes, they're working on a hybrid for the Rogue, for the new Rogue, but they wouldn't say when it's coming, probably a couple of years away. That's really the only only real flaw I would find in it. Everything else about it is really good.
From a strategic product planning standpoint.
Yeah, everything else about it is excellent, but it doesn't jump out. It doesn't leapfrog anybody. It's fully competitive with the RAV and the CR-V and the Escape, and we'll see about the Tucson. Certainly from a design standpoint, that one definitely steps out. But otherwise, it's really, really good.
So the other thing that I would be concerned about for Nissan in terms of year over year sales comparisons is they were so heavily fleet dependent in the past. I think that, I mean, I think this vehicle looks really nice. I definitely feel like it stands out from that standpoint because I do think it's much more expressive from the front end. But from how much of their sales was actually retail versus say car rental fleets, which are in the toilet now because nobody's traveling.
Yeah, I don't know how big a percentage of Rogue sales were fleet versus the sedans. I think it was much more of a problem for the sedans for Nissan for Altima.
I don't know. I felt like every time I was picking up a rental car that there was Nissans there, but that's just like anecdotally. But I do think it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's a really nice looking vehicle for sure.
But one other thing, and this is not necessarily to slam Nissan or anything about it, is the pricing, it's certainly again totally competitive. Starts around 26 grand. The loaded Platinum that I drove, you're up in that $38,000 price range. And
wow,
just like we've I think we started the complaints on that with the CX-5, but everybody's in that price range at the top of their lineups now. And so,
this is the heart of the market though.
Yeah, it is.
This is the hottest segment. And, you've got choices from mid 20s to, low 40s.
But to Sam's point though, that price point then just invites so much competition.
It's absolutely super competitive. And that's where I'm picking up the, almost the sense that it's good. Yeah, everything else is good too.
It's excellent.
Is it good enough?
But so is everything else. That's the thing there's nothing really about it that really stands out from a really impressive crowd. So it's not a superstar in any way. And, I think it kind of needs, at least some superstar feature to really set it apart. And aside from maybe the design, everything else about it is just, as good as, but not.
Right.
If they want to sell a bunch of them, Nissan Financial will make you feel like a superstar.
All right.
Easy terms and no down payment. Sell a zillion of them.
Anyway.
Shall we get to listener mail?
Of course we should. What do we have? What's in the mailbox?
Let's start with Elliot Johnston. Says,
all right, Elliot.
I feel like your podcast is covering the transition to electrification better than anyone because you always bring the story back to the reality of the customer experience. Well,
we are men of the people, and we are men and women of the people.
I'm comfortable with just men of the people.
Or people of the people.
We're people of the people.
Anyway, it feels like we're still in the early days of the transition to EVs. We very much so. I mean, 1.5% of the market, is electric. How should a buyer think about long-term reliability and resale value for electrified products? For example, the Wrangler holds its value very well and is reliable for many miles and years. The new 4xe hybrid Jeep is exciting from a power and torque perspective, but should buyers worry about how long a hybrid bought in 2020 will either retain value in the face of rapid innovation or retain performance over the long term?
Rebecca, you're the analyst. What do you think?
Elliot, I think that this is a really, really valid question. So it's funny. I was just before I got home this evening, I had stopped and talked to a couple of people with the Hyundai Kona EV, and they were asking me about the vehicle. And I said to them, the only thing I would tell you is that you should absolutely lease any of a hybrid or electric. I just think
at least a plug-in hybrid.
At least, right, to lease a plug-in or a hybrid or yes, because I just feel like the technology is changing so fast that, and we don't really know how that resale value number is going to be, and I had worked at Kelley Blue Book, and that was a discussion that the residual value team often had. So I think that it's great to purchase this to as we talked about to try and get a zero emission vehicle on the road to limit your carbon footprint. But I would encourage people to lease only.
So I guess it depends on what you expect out of the car too. Like, because I think that's sort of the same calculus that you do on a internal combustion car when it comes right down to it, right? You do the am I going to get my money out of this? Is it going to hold its value? Or am I just keeping this to extract all the value out of it anyway, and it doesn't really matter?
Well,
the resale
so
value.
Sam, from a battery degradation standpoint, is that something that they've addressed, would you say, for the most part?
Absolutely on hybrids. Hybrids, it's a non-issue,
Sure.
and I think to a high degree, certainly for plug-in hybrids as well. The performance is pretty much not going to degrade over 100 to 150,000 miles.
Okay.
You're
Because
going
the
to be fine.
Nissan Leaf did have that. The first gen Leaf had a lot of those issues.
Yeah, battery EVs are a little bit different story, especially the Leaf. The Leaf is kind of unique in that it had an air-cooled battery as a battery electric vehicle. Most of the other battery EVs out there, like the Bolt and the Teslas and most other stuff, uses a liquid-cooled battery, and those tend to hold up better, because you can do better thermal management with a liquid cooled battery.
So heat and cool, heating, cooling,
heat and extreme cold are the
Okay.
challenges. That's what kills a battery.
Yeah.
For hybrids, because of the way the battery is used, it's used differently than it is in a battery EV. They tend to hold up better, even though they are air cooled. Getting 300,000 miles out of a hybrid battery is not at all uncommon.
Yeah, I had talked to a guy a number of months ago that had a Prius like that. So Dan, I think I should clarify my initial response. When I'm talking about leasing, I'm talking strictly pure EVs. On a hybrid,
Okay.
I think it's a very different
Even
situation.
for plug-in hybrids, I would probably tend to agree with you. It depends. I think to what some of what you were saying, Dan, it depends on what your use case is. If you're like me and you tend to keep your vehicles for 8-10 years or more, then I think resale value is less of an issue, and then I wouldn't bother leasing in that case. If you're somebody that wants to replace your vehicle every 2-3 years, then yeah, lease it.
But I do think that with EVs, there's it's such a rapidly evolving side of the market that leasing also sort of hedges your bets a little bit. So in 5 years, the cars are going to look a lot different. And a 5-year lease is long, but in 3 years, the options are going to look a lot different for EVs than they do now. So if you've signed on for a 5-year or a 6-year loan, you're almost like you're stuck with that. And then at the end of it, you might want to trade it in and get a new one anyway. So yeah, I think leasing is also not only just the sort of pure financial side of it, but also it's a way for you to trade into the rapidly evolving technology with a fixed cost. So that's not terrible.
And on the battery EV side, and also both plug-ins on plug-in vehicles, there are so many new models that are coming out in the next 24 or 36 months that there's going to be a lot of different options that you might want to take a look at. The other thing, to the resale value thing for battery EVs generally do have significantly worse resale value, in large part because when they're the ones that have been bought so far, when they were bought new, they had federal tax credits on them. So that was typically $7,500 off. That gets factored into that resale value because when you buy it used, you don't get that tax credit. And so, if you think of the net price after the tax credit, then the depreciation is not as bad. It's more comparable to an internal combustion vehicle. But
That's a
if
good
you're
point.
looking sticker versus resale value, then it looks really bad. So that's something to consider. So
Right.
it depends on how, what your use case is, how long you want to keep it. But right now, I would agree. Right now is probably a better time to lease one than to buy one, and reevaluate, in 2-3 years, and see what new options there are out there, because there are going to be a lot of new options.
There are. And one thing I would recommend also is that if you go the leasing route, kind of to Dan's point as well, if you go the leasing route for those 2 or 3 years that you lease that, your payment's probably going to be less than if you had bought the car. So stick the gap, stick it in the bank so that if you have a down payment, then if you decide, hey, you know what, leasing wasn't for me, or I feel more comfortable with the technology and I want to now buy a vehicle, the difficulty about going from leasing to purchase is you don't really have a down payment. You're not you're not trading in a car. So, prepare for that. Think, okay, I'm going to stick a little money aside.
Budget for it.
Right. Budget for it. And so that when you go into that dealership, then you can it makes the transition from leasing to purchase a lot easier.
Yeah. I do think that, there's those like financial advice folks that hate leasing and they'll say it's never a good idea. And you don't end up with an asset at the end of it. And it's only a cost because you're essentially renting.
But a car is also not an asset. Like it's an expense.
It's absolutely an expense. It turns into an asset with very little residual value at the end of the. I mean, it's a depreciating asset, right? It's not so.
And anybody that tells you a car is going to be an appreciating asset is a liar.
No. I mean, even a car that something classic that winds up selling for a couple $100,000. You've had to maintain it and keep it up that entire time. Like you're not coming out ahead. But
and those are few and far between.
when you're in your peak earning years, like you're paying for a car pretty much no matter what. Like you've got those short periods of time where you pay off the car and you pay to keep it up. A lease typically has maintenance, at least some kind of maintenance included, and EVs need less maintenance. So balance out your options, run the numbers and figure out, sort of where you can afford it, or you can look at a used EV. I think the reliability question is not really much of an issue in from what I've seen. Actually, EVs have fewer parts. They're still pretty sophisticated, but there's not as much to go wrong there. And I mean, there's one EV brand that I would avoid. But other than that, I think that the manufacturers that are building EVs and that are going to come to the market with EVs in the next couple of years are going to have good stuff that you can trust at least as much as their gas cars.
All right, next up, Paul W. Paul, thank you for watching me on the Tech Guy. Says, I'm looking to purchase a pickup truck. Never had one. What are your thoughts on the Ram 1500 with the Hemi? Does not like e-torque engine due to the auto on-off switch that makes the vehicle turn off at stoplights. I live in city suburbs and will use it as a daily driver. Currently have a 2012 Jag XJ with a V8. I want to keep a naturally aspirated engine with power and refuse to pay $100,000 for a new car. Even the Mercedes S-Class has this bi-turbo crap. Well, I like turbos. I have no problem with turbos. Anyway.
I like the linear response of a naturally aspirated engine. I understand.
Although that Toyota 86 is slightly nonlinear and it's naturally aspirated, so no guarantee that you're going to get linear response. Anyway,
right. Predictable.
He sent along a summary of what he's looking at. It's Ram 1500 Hemi Longhorn. Net price on the one he configured was $57,700, which is not an unusual price to pay for a new truck these days. So before I hand it off to you two to comment, I just want to say e-torque is not like the other auto stop start systems that are out there. And I don't know if Paul, if you've actually test driven the e-torque. But this is a 48 volt mild hybrid system, which will actually keep the engine off significantly longer, like minutes at a time when you're stopped. And typically, when you restart, it doesn't restart the engine as soon as you release the brake pedal. It actually starts rolling on electricity. The starter generator actually starts things going, and then at a 2 or 3 miles an hour is where it actually restarts the engine most of the time.
It feels better.
It's actually really seamless most of the time. You will, aside from anything you might hear, you generally will not feel it stopping and starting. It's really, really seamless most of the time. So I would definitely consider, if you haven't test driven one, if you test drove it and still didn't like it, fine, go for it. But if you haven't actually taken one for a drive, I would seriously consider taking one for a test drive and make sure that you don't like it, because especially since you say that you live in the city and suburbs and we use it as a daily driver, that means you're going to be doing a lot of stop and go, and that mild hybrid system will make a significant benefit in fuel economy with that thing. I mean, we're talking like 10 to 15% better fuel economy, which on a truck at 18 miles per gallon versus 20, 21 miles per gallon, you're going to notice that over time. You may not care, and that's fine, but just something to consider. You guys?
Yeah. So, Paul, thank you for the email through Rebecca Drives, my website. And
what was that site again?
RebeccaDrives.com. Yes.
Okay.
I really liked the Ram 1500 when I had it back at Christmas time. My brother Larry actually spent a lot of time driving it, which was very kind of FCA to let him do that. And he loved it. It had the V8 engine. It had that e-torque system in it, and it was quite seamless. I am very conscious of that, of the transparency or lack thereof when it comes to stop start, but this was really, really good. I do think, driving around town, it's a big vehicle. I mean, he says that he has a Jag XJ. This is not that. So,
it is
totally
but
a Jag XJ is not a XJ is not a small car either.
But
right.
this is on a completely other level, though.
It is. It's a completely different driving experience. But I think that, overall, the Ram 1500, driving it around the suburbs where I live, it was a big truck, but it wasn't ridiculous. I felt like I could park it in places, and it's certainly fun to be up that high. And we've often talked about the interior job that they did on it. So I think it's definitely worth a test drive. It's definitely worth spending some time on. And Sam, I agree with you. I would go in with an open mind and test drive the e-torque. If you don't like it, say that's totally fine, but just go in with an open mind. I think they've done a really good job on that.
I like the Ram 1500. The last one I had was very expensive. It was like $70,000.
Oh yeah.
And it had the V8 with the e-torque, and it does okay. I'm not sure I'd want a daily in a sort of normal suburban urban kind of mix, but that's neither here nor there. That's just my preference. It has its charms. It's big, it's comfortable, it's relatively quiet, has a lot of features. I understand what he's saying about the e-torque and how even as smooth as it can be, it's not necessarily pleasant. If you don't like it, you don't like it, and it takes some getting used to. I remember the first few cars I had with the stop start, I would shut it off. Now I'm just like, whatever, I don't care. So you get used to it, but it's still something that's there. I think the difference is, like, for $57,000, are you going to use the truck as a truck? Because if you are, I think you might consider going up to an HD, just because it's a truck. Well,
yeah, I think I'd be curious, and Paul, please send us a note about this, how he's going to use the truck. What is his motivation? Because I totally agree with you, Dan. I think that I look at other people that use, in pickup trucks, and I think I can't really say that I would enjoy driving it every day as a daily driver in the suburbs. So
yeah.
I think it's a good point.
I'm not gonna criticize for wanting a truck and use, like, look.
Of course not. It's
fine. That's not what I'm trying to get at. If you want the truck and you never fill the bed, that's fine. It's your choice. So that doesn't really bother me. It's just I think if you're going to use it as a
notwithstanding
truck,
all the stuff we talked about in the previous segment.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, right, exactly. All the environmental. But I think, I love, the Toyota Tacoma has been around forever, that as a daily driver, that downsizing one down to midsize.
See, but I don't know. I would go with a Ram before any midsize truck. or I would go with a 1500 of any truck.
But I'm thinking
before
just as a
any
daily driver, that combination, again, it depends.
Yeah, it depends on what you want to use it for.
We need more information.
Yes.
But I also find that if you wanted a pickup like this and you didn't want an auto stop start or e-torque or whatever, there's other choices. I think you can probably get an F-150 with the Coyote. I think there's one XLT.
Yeah, you can get the F-150 with the 5-liter.
Okay.
And of course, you can also get the Silverado and Sierra with a 5.3 or a 6-liter V8.
Right. And so one of the favorite trucks I had like truck months here over the summer. And one of my favorites was the Silverado Trail Boss. And that had the 5.3. And so the Trail Boss is it's got knobbier tires and stuff, but just the Silverado with the 5.3, it's quieter than either the Ram or the Ford. It's as light on its feet as the aluminum Ford, because it's actually about as light. It's actually, I think, lighter than the F-150. And it's just like, that is a quiet, smooth, good powertrain. It probably does have stop start, but you can disable it.
It does have stop start, as does the Ford.
And I got it up. I think all the trucks have stop start. You're gonna have to just get
the only
used to disabling it.
The only one with a V8 that doesn't is the non-e-torque Hemi.
Oh, okay. So there you go.
The standard version of the Hemi does
want.
not have stop start, which I confirmed with FCA earlier today.
I mean, honestly, the e-torque, it's not that much of a performance boost, because that's not really what it's for. In that sense, it's like an occasional sort of, hole filler where there's gaps in the performance of the powertrain. It sort of fills in that hole, but the 48
it's more for
sort
fuel
of mild
economy.
hybrid. Yeah, it helps out in some spots, but it's not like the way hybrids have gone, where they increase performance significantly. But I really liked the GM trucks. So if you're a loyal Ram guy, I get it. But if you can hold your nose and go over to the Chevy store, and I managed to eke out like a 21 something miles per gallon, maybe even more out of the Trail Boss, driven gently on the highway.
Must have been very gently, because I think I only got about 15 when I had a Trail Boss a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I mean it gets down there in the city, but it also has the this one had the 5.3, and it has the dynamic skip fire and all that, which is again seamless with the 10-speed. Like that's a stellar powertrain, and it's efficient in its own way compared to the e-torque. So give those a try. I think we just sort of did a really roundabout answer to an alternative.
All right. Next up, Bob K. Said recently we were talking about Volvo, talking about the XC90 that had both a supercharger and a turbocharger. Can you explain what they are? I will do that really quickly. Both of them are designed to pump more air into the engine, because the way you make power is by taking air and fuel and burning it. The more air and fuel you can combust in the engine, the more power you'll get. So a supercharger is a mechanical compressor. So it's driven by a belt off the engine and pumps, as the engine revs up, it turns the compressor faster, pumps more air in, makes more power. It's very good for responsiveness, but as the engine gets at higher speeds, it's not so great for efficiency, and so it's typically has a clutch to disengage it as you get to higher RPMs. It also makes more noise. A turbocharger
makes good noise. Good noise.
Yes. Turbocharger, same idea, pump more air in, but rather than having a mechanical connection to the engine to drive the compressor, there is a turbine that sits in the exhaust gas flow. As the engine revs up, as you step on the gas pedal, you get more exhaust flow. It spins up that turbine, which in turn spins up the compressor, which pumps more air in. It's more efficient, quieter than a supercharger, but in fact, the original name of turbochargers was turbo supercharger. So technically, they are both superchargers. At any rate, the challenge with turbos is you can have turbo lag, especially if you have a larger turbo. and so, there's a delay between when you step on the accelerator and when you actually get that power. What Volvo has done and what some other manufacturers have done in the past with using both a turbocharger and a supercharger is they use the turbocharger at lower RPMs to give you that instant responsiveness. And then you can use a larger turbocharger that's going to maybe have a little bit of delay to fill it in at the top end of the RPM band. So you get supercharger, and then that feeds into the turbocharger, and so you get more power overall and more seamless, or tries to be more seamless. It's never entirely seamless, but it's pretty close. So that's what the two are, why they're different. Some engines use just most engines just use turbochargers, typically a smaller turbo that has more responsiveness, or they may use two turbos that are smaller but combined have as much capacity as one larger turbo, but they're more responsive. So that's the quick and dirty. We can talk about that in more detail sometime if you want.
I got absolutely roasted back years ago when I wrote a description of how a turbo works for Autoblog. I said, as the exhaust gas cools and decompresses, which is what drives the turbine. And what I really meant was the pressure drop is what drives the turbine, because it expands as it both cools, which is not normal. Things typically expand when they get heated, but because it's coming from under pressure from high pressure to low pressure, it's expanding because of the pressure drop, and that's what's actually sort of driving the turbine. Man, people did not get it, and they were brutal. But
You're still not over it, are you?
I was just like, I tried to put it in your terms, folks. I tried to make it,
It's actually more the kinetic energy that's driving the turbine. The pressure comes as an effect of going through the turbine. And
oh, really?
Yeah, because you're actually you're converting that thermal energy in the exhaust gas and the kinetic energy into mechanical energy to drive the turbine. So, and the nature of a turbine is it does expand and it cools, but it's actually the kinetic energy that's driving it. But
yeah, so
it's all conservation of energy. Yeah.
It made sense in my head, and when it came out my fingers, it also made sense. And then I read the comments.
Next one is for Rebecca Moore. Said this is from Sean. He had the podcast on when you talked about Subaru eyesight intruding into your visual periphery. Of course, during that discussion, my eye caught the extended black box behind the mirror on my rental. It was a Mitsubishi Outlander. I thought it was good engineering to side everything to the far side, so the mirror hid most of the box from the driver. I was shocked. It was shocking how many Mitsubishi Eclipse and Outlanders the Nashville Avis had, which begs another question: as the car market disappears in favor of SUVs, when do rental fleets shift? SUVs are still considered more premium. So, let's address the eyesight question first.
Yeah, I think so. As I had mentioned, it was just kind of a momentary distraction until I figured out what it was. That when I was driving the Subaru Crosstrek, the new one, the 2021, in the rearview mirror on either side of the rearview mirror are small casements that hold the what are the things?
Cameras.
The sensors, the cameras for Subaru's eyesight system. And it was just it was one of those, like, when something catches your eye and then once you know what it is, it goes away. You don't pay attention to it anymore. So that's what Sean is referring to.
Kind of like the notch on my phone.
Kind of like the what?
The notch on my phone screen.
Notch. Some phones, that screen
Never
has
mind.
a little notch.
Okay, that's annoying. Yeah.
Sorry.
And then as for the Avis question, I think this is a really interesting question because, first of all, I'm not surprised that Mitsubishi Eclipse and Outlanders are at the Avis counter. As we talked about with, gosh, I'm getting really tired. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you. As we were talking about with Nissan, almost every company, not all of them, but a number of companies will sell very heavily into fleet rental sales. And so this is a tactic in order to really, frankly, to use capacity in a plan and to sell more cars.
Move the
And
metal.
they sell them. I'm sorry?
Move the metal.
To move the metal, exactly. So, Mitsubishi's been struggling in the States for brand recognition, for product, for dealer experience. And this is a way to get their vehicles on the road. It has happened before when somebody thinks, they rent something and they're like, wow, I've never been in this car before. I've never been in this brand. I really like it. And maybe it, would lead to a sale. But that's why you're going to see quite a few Mitsubishis, because the brand itself has been struggling to find its footing in the States for a while.
Well, and Mitsubishi's still willing to do it, while other brands
Yes.
have been less willing to do it. Even
Honda will
Nissan.
absolutely not do fleet sales. They feel like it devalues the brand.
Yep. And traditionally it does, because the rental companies, once they sell off their used rental cars, they sell them at a fairly significant discount, and because they also buy them from the manufacturers at a discount, so they sell them off at a discount, and that tends to depress the residual values for the retail models as well. I just want to add one more thing about eyesight versus what Sean saw in the Mitsubishi. The eyesight system is unique in that it's a stereo camera system. There's actually the module that holds the cameras is quite a bit larger than what you find in most cars, because it actually relies on two cameras, and the parallax difference between those cameras, kind of like our eyes, our two eyes, the distance between the eyes is what gives us our depth perception. They're doing the same thing because they're using it for adaptive cruise control, and they're using that to calculate the distance to the car in front of you, rather than using a radar sensor. And the Mitsubishi, like most cars, has a monovision system. There's only one camera, so the module can actually be much smaller, and it actually fits typically behind the mirror, so you are hiding most of it. That's why you didn't see that same very large system that's in the Subarus, because they only have a single camera, unlike Subaru. All right. One last question. This one from Chad Reckling. It came to Rebecca, and Chad is with the State of Iowa Department of Human Services. Rebecca, I was listening to your podcast recently when you were talking about the Land Rover Defender experience. I think I would love that drive as well. You mentioned a history of the Defender that Land Rover gave you as a book. Do you know if that's something the common person can obtain or buy, or is that for the lucky press people who only to have? I would be interested to see what it's all about. Thanks for your response, and I love listening to the show with you on it. We all do.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Chad. And you know what? I promise you, I will look into this. I did a quick perusal because this actually came in just before we started recording. I didn't find it in my usual sources, but I think I'm going to ask a couple of people for you. So hopefully I'll have an answer in the next few days.
I think they do at least have some sort of trial courses at the dealerships where you can take them and try them out.
No, he's looking for the book itself.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. The driving experience. So the Land Rover driving experience is actually available to the general public. You don't have to have a Land Rover. There's three. Yeah, there's three in the U.S. So Chad, if you ever want to do this, there's one out in California. There's one in South Carolina. Is that where it was? And then there's one up in Vermont. But the arguably the closest one to you would probably be either the Carolinas or treat yourself and go to California. But it's actually open to the public. You can, I don't know how much it costs, but it is something that anybody can do, and they have vehicles there that you can use as well. So I think it's a really cool experience. I definitely want to do it with some family members. We were talking about it, but I will look into the book for you, Chad. I promise.
Yeah, I got confused there, clearly.
Yeah, the California one's in Carmel, and it's beautiful out there. So
yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's amazing.
Spot, great place to go, take a vacation there once they get the fires out. I don't think it's burning in Carmel right now, so you can probably go there. But definitely a beautiful area there at the Quail Lodge. And one thing you might want to do, Sean, is take a look on
this is
eBay.
Chad.
Chad, sorry.
It's okay. Sean was before.
Yeah.
I did the same thing.
Yes. Anyway, what you might want to
getting
do
late.
is take a look at eBay.
Yes.
Because even if it is something that was produced specifically for media, there are some less ethical members of the media that will take items like that and post them on eBay, press kits and other swag.
Handful of thumb drives.
Yeah, and post those on eBay. So you might want to take a look there. Although I would discourage you from actually buying from one of those people because we don't want to encourage that sort of behavior. Rebecca will see if it's available. It's probably something that they might sell through the experience centers.
It's true.
It
might.
Part of the package at the experience center.
Yeah, I'll definitely check it out for him though.
All right.
Promise.
All right. Well, that is the show because it's 2 hours roughly. And so thanks all for hanging in and thanks for listening. You know where to find us. feedback@wheelbearings.media. And in the meantime, enjoy.
Thank you so much, everyone.
At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability. ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.